The fluorescence of the Atlas Freight Systems executive boardroom hummed with a sterile, unforgiving intensity. Raymond Cole stood near the massive mahogany table, feeling the weight of his 55 years settling into the marrow of his bones. For 22 years, he had poured his soul into this company. He had built the Gridmaster system, the invisible digital circulatory system that routed $550 million in global freight every single day. He knew every line of code, every routing protocol, every hidden failsafe that kept the massive cargo ships moving across the oceans and the trucks rolling across the continents. Yet, as he looked across the table at Brandon Finch, none of that seemed to matter. Brandon, a 38-year-old senior vice president with a freshly minted business degree and an ego the size of a shipping container, leaned back in his leather chair. His suit cost more than the average warehouse worker earned in a year, and his smile was a sharp, predatory thing. For 8 months, Brandon had been systematically dismantling Raymond's department, slicing budgets, firing veteran staff, and replacing seasoned professionals with cheap, inexperienced offshore contractors. The disrespect had been palpable, a slow poison seeping into the corporate culture. Today was the breaking point. Raymond had calmly handed in his resignation, citing irreconcilable differences in operational philosophy. He had expected a tense but professional acknowledgement. Instead, Brandon chose to make a public spectacle. Brandon chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that echoed in the quiet room. Around the table, a half-dozen junior managers sat in uncomfortable silence, their eyes darting between the veteran director and the arrogant executive. "You think you are indispensable, Raymond," Brandon said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You think because you have been here since the dark ages of dial-up that this place cannot run without you. Let me make something abundantly clear. You are replaceable inventory. The Gridmaster is a machine, and machines do not need sentimental attachments. They just need operators." Raymond felt a muscle twitch in his jaw, but he kept his expression perfectly neutral. He did not raise his voice. He did not clench his fists. He simply absorbed the insult, letting it wash over him like rain off a waterproof tarp. "I have submitted my resignation, Brandon," Raymond said evenly. "I will work out my notice period if you wish, or I can leave today." Brandon leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table and steepling his fingers. "Oh, you are not leaving today, and you are not working out a notice period. You are going to go home, cool off, and realize how foolish you are being. You will take back this resignation by sunrise tomorrow, or you will be fired with cause for insubordination. And good luck getting a severance package or a professional recommendation after that." The junior managers exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. They were too terrified of Brandon's wrath to defend the man who had trained most of them. Raymond looked at each of their faces, seeing the quiet apologies in their eyes. He understood. They had mortgages, families, and careers to protect. He did not hold their silence against them. "By sunrise," Raymond repeated softly, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Sunrise," Brandon confirmed, a smirk playing on his lips. "Consider it a generous grace period for an old man who has temporarily lost his senses." Raymond did not say another word. He turned on his heel and walked out of the boardroom. The silence he left behind was heavy, thick with the unspoken realization that a line had been crossed. He walked down the long carpeted hallway toward his office. The walls were lined with framed photographs of massive cargo vessels bearing the Atlas logo, evidence of the company's global reach. Raymond had helped build that reach. He had spent sleepless nights troubleshooting server failures, spent missed holidays coordinating emergency reroutes during hurricanes, and sacrificed countless personal moments to ensure the freight never stopped moving. When he reached his office, he did not pack any boxes. He did not gather his awards or the small trinkets he had accumulated over 2 decades. He only took his coat, his keys, and a faded photograph of his son Owen. Owen was 25 now, fighting a chronic autoimmune illness that required incredibly expensive medical care. Raymond's elderly mother Martha was also in a specialized assisted living facility, her care entirely dependent on his income. Brandon knew about Raymond's financial responsibilities. The threat of firing him without severance was a calculated, cruel strike at his vulnerabilities. Raymond walked to the elevator banks. The clock on the wall read 10 minutes past 6 in the evening. The bustling energy of the daytime operations floor had faded into the quiet hum of the night shift. He pressed the down button, the illuminated arrow casting a faint glow on his face. On the ground floor, he walked past the security desk. Walter, the night guard who had been working the desk for 15 years, looked up from his monitor. Walter was a solid, dependable man who always had a kind word for the late-night workers. "Heading out early, Mr. Cole?" Walter asked, a warm smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Yes, Walter, it is time to go," Raymond said. "See you tomorrow." "Sir, have a good evening." "You too, Walter. Take care of yourself." Raymond pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool evening air. The city lights were beginning to flicker on, casting long shapes across the wet pavement. He walked to his car, his footsteps steady and deliberate. He was not a man prone to rash decisions or fiery outbursts. He was an engineer, a master of systems and logic. Brandon Finch thought he held all the cards. He thought he could bully and intimidate a man who had spent his life building the very foundation they stood upon. Raymond unlocked his car and slid into the driver's seat. He did not start the engine immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened a secure remote access application. He stared at the screen for a long moment, the soft blue light illuminating the determination in his eyes. Brandon had given him until sunrise. But Raymond knew the sun had already set on his time at Atlas Freight Systems. The rain began to fall as Raymond navigated his sedan through the evening traffic. The rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers provided a steady beat to his racing thoughts. The city was a blur of neon and headlights, slick streets reflecting the chaotic energy of the metropolis. But inside the car, Raymond felt a profound, almost terrifying sense of calm. The decision had been made. The bridge was not just burned, it was completely vaporized. His mind drifted to his son, Owen. At 25, Owen possessed a brilliant mind and a gentle spirit, but his physical health had always been fragile. The medical bills were a constant looming mountain, a financial burden that Raymond carried with stoic determination. The cost of Owen's specialized medication alone was $6,000 every single month, and Martha's assisted living facility required another $5,000. Raymond's base salary of $210,000 was substantial, but between the treatments for Owen and the rising costs of his mother's care, the margins were thinner than anyone at the office would ever guess. Brandon had undoubtedly looked at Raymond's long tenure and assumed he was comfortable, complacent, and easily squeezed. It was a massive miscalculation. Raymond gripped the steering wheel, feeling the worn leather beneath his palms. For 8 months, he had watched Brandon systematically destroy the department. It started with small things: denied budget requests for server upgrades, mandatory overtime for the junior staff without compensation. Then came the layoffs. Brandon had unceremoniously fired 45 veteran network engineers, men and women who understood the intricate, fragile nature of the logistics network. They were replaced by 12 cheap, offshore contractors who did not understand the difference between a minor routing error and a catastrophic system failure. Brandon called it operational optimization. Raymond called it a slow-motion disaster. What made it worse was that Brandon had executed these layoffs in direct violation of the Federal Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. The law clearly mandated that a company of their size must provide 60 days of written notice before laying off a large percentage of its workforce. Raymond had warned Brandon in writing multiple times, explaining that the company was exposing itself to massive federal penalties and class action lawsuits. Brandon had laughed off the warnings, telling Raymond that his job was to manage the system, not the legal department. Brandon had even ordered Raymond to sign the termination approvals to make it look like the department agreed with the decision. Raymond had refused, and that refusal was the real reason Brandon wanted him gone. The logistics system, Gridmaster, was not just a piece of software. It was a complex web of permissions, authorizations, and custom protocols that Raymond had personally designed over 2 decades. When Brandon had taken over as senior vice president, he had demanded administrative access to everything, dismissing Raymond's warnings about the system's delicate architecture. But what Brandon did not understand, what his expensive business degrees and arrogant demeanor had blinded him to, was that administrative access was not the same as operational authority. Raymond pulled his car into the driveway of his modest suburban home. He turned off the engine and sat in the quiet dark for a few moments, listening to the rain drum against the roof. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone again. He opened the secure application that connected directly to the deepest layers of the Gridmaster network. He navigated past the standard security protocols, past the firewalls, and entered a private directory. These were his personal executive authorization keys. They were not company property in the traditional sense. They were custom cryptographic signatures tied specifically to his biometric identity and his original contract, required to validate the most critical routing operations across the global network. Without them, the system would revert to a fail-safe mode, freezing all automated transactions to prevent unauthorized rerouting of high-value cargo. Brandon had never asked about the executive authorization keys because Brandon did not know they existed. He had assumed the system simply ran on the code. Raymond's thumb hovered over the screen. If he revoked his keys, the entire network would grind to a halt within hours. The automated cranes at the ports would stop. The customs clearance protocols would freeze. $550 million in freight would sit idle, locked in digital purgatory. It was the nuclear option, but Brandon's actions had left him with no choice. Raymond pressed the button. The screen flashed green, confirming the revocation. The digital connection that had bound him to Atlas Freight Systems for 22 years was severed. He stepped out of the car and walked into his house. The silence of the empty rooms was a stark contrast to the storm brewing outside. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and sat at the small wooden table. He had one more task to complete before he could rest. He opened his laptop and brought up a private contact list. He scrolled past the names of vendors, past old colleagues, until he found the specific name he sought. Diana Hayes, Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Cargo. Meridian Cargo was Atlas's largest rival. They had tried to recruit Raymond for 5 years, recognizing the brilliance of Gridmaster. Raymond had declined out of loyalty, but that loyalty was now gone. He picked up his phone and dialed Diana Hayes, the Chief Executive Officer. It was past 8 in the evening, but she was always working. She answered on the second ring. Diana Hayes. Diana, it is Raymond Cole. A brief pause, then a low, appreciative chuckle. Raymond, I wondered when you would call. What brings you to me at this hour? I am leaving Atlas, Raymond said, effective immediately. When Diana spoke again, her tone was sharp and focused. Are you bound by a non-compete? It expired 3 years ago, and Brandon Finch never bothered to renew it. He assumed I would stay forever. Brandon is a fool, Diana stated. I have watched him gut your department. Have you secured a new position? Not yet, Raymond replied, but I have operational methodologies and deep institutional knowledge that will benefit Meridian. I am sure you do, Diana said. Meet me tomorrow morning at 5:45 in my office. Do not be late. I will be there, Raymond said. He closed the laptop. The storm outside raged, but inside, Raymond smiled. The board was set. Tomorrow, Brandon Finch would face a sunrise he would never forget. The Meridian Cargo headquarters was a towering monolith of glass and steel, a stark contrast to the aging concrete building of Atlas Freight Systems. Raymond arrived at 5:30 in the morning, the city still shrouded in the deep blues and grays of pre-dawn. The rain from the previous night had stopped, leaving the streets slick and clean. He walked into the massive lobby, his footsteps echoing in the quiet expanse. A single security guard sat at the polished marble desk. Raymond approached, offering a polite nod. Raymond Cole, I have a meeting with Diana Hayes. The guard checked a tablet, his eyebrows raising slightly. Yes, Mr. Cole, she is expecting you on the top floor. The executive elevator is waiting. Raymond took the elevator up. Watching the city slowly awaken through the glass walls, he felt a profound sense of clarity. For 22 years, he had been the unseen engine of a massive machine. Today, he was stepping out of the darkness. The doors chimed and opened onto a luxurious reception area. Diana Hayes stood near a massive window, looking out over the harbor where ships bearing the Meridian logo were already moving in the early light. She was a striking woman, radiating an aura of absolute competence and efficient leadership. Raymond, she said, turning to face him. She extended a hand. Her grip was firm, her eyes assessing. You are early, I appreciate that. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Diana. She gestured toward a sleek conference table. Sit. Let us not waste time with pleasantries. You spent 2 decades building the infrastructure of Atlas. Why walk away now? Raymond sat, folding his hands on the table. He did not speak of Brandon's insults or the petty office politics. He spoke of strategy. Atlas is compromising its core operational stability for short-term financial gains, Raymond explained, his voice calm and measured. The leadership is dismantling the support structures that keep the network running. I refuse to be the scapegoat when the inevitable collapse occurs. Additionally, my personal expertise is no longer valued there. Diana poured 2 cups of black coffee from a silver carafe and pushed one toward him. And you believe your expertise is valued here? I know it is, Raymond replied, meeting her gaze evenly. I built the Gridmaster system. I know every vulnerability in global supply chain management. I know how to optimize routing in ways that your current systems, while impressive, have not yet achieved. I can increase your operational efficiency by at least 18% within the first year. Deanna took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving his face. She was silent for a long moment, the quiet hum of the building the only sound in the room. I know about your son, Raymond, she said softly. Raymond stiffened slightly, but his expression remained neutral. My personal life does not affect my professional capabilities. I know it does not, Diana agreed quickly. But I also know that medical care is expensive. I know that Atlas pays you $210,000 a year. It is a respectable salary for a director, but it is an insult for the man who actually runs the company. She set her cup down and leaned forward. Brandon Finch is an arrogant child playing with adult tools. I have wanted you at Meridian for 5 years. You are the invisible backbone of the industry. So let us make a deal. Raymond remained silent, waiting. $370,000 base salary, Diana said, her voice crisp and clear. Comprehensive executive health coverage that includes full coverage for your son's specific treatments. A dedicated budget to build your own department, no questions asked. A signing bonus of $100,000, sufficient to secure your mother's care facility for the next decade. Raymond felt the breath catch in his throat, but he maintained his composure. The offer was staggering. It was not just financial security. It was total validation of his worth. It was the resources he needed to save his family. What do you expect in return? Raymond asked. I expect you to do for Meridian what you did for Atlas, Diana said, a predatory smile touching her lips. I expect you to build the most efficient, indestructible logistics network in the world, and I expect you to help me capture their market share. Raymond took a slow sip of his coffee. The bitter liquid grounded him, sharpening his focus. I accept your terms, Diana. She reached into a folder on the table and slid a contract across to him, along with a heavy silver pen. I had the legal department draft this early this morning. Read it over. Raymond read the terms carefully, confirming the medical coverage and the department autonomy. Satisfied, he signed his name with steady, deliberate strokes. Welcome to Meridian Cargo, Raymond, Diana said, taking the contract back. You can start setting up your office today, though I imagine you might want to keep an eye on the news this morning. Raymond smiled, a genuine expression of satisfaction. I believe it will be an interesting morning in the logistics sector. He stood up and walked toward the window. Looking out over the sprawling port facilities below, the sun was just beginning to breach the horizon, casting a golden glow over the water. Brandon Finch had demanded he return to Atlas by sunrise to beg for his job. The sun was up, and Raymond Cole was exactly where he needed to be. The chaos at Atlas Freight Systems began exactly at 8 o'clock in the morning. Brandon Finch sat in his corner office, nursing a double espresso and reviewing a spreadsheet of projected quarterly savings. He felt a smug satisfaction. Firing the veteran director would save the company a significant amount in salary and benefits, and it would finally solidify Brandon's absolute control over the division. He fully expected Raymond to crawl back into the boardroom by 9 o'clock, head bowed, ready to accept whatever humiliating terms Brandon offered. At 8 minutes past 8, the phone on Brandon's desk rang. It was the director of port operations in Rotterdam. Brandon, we have a massive problem. The director's voice crackled over the line, laced with panic. The automated cranes have locked down. The system is rejecting all authorization codes for the incoming freighters. Brandon frowned, annoyed by the interruption. Have you tried rebooting the local servers? You know how temperamental the system can be. We tried everything, the director replied. The terminal says it requires executive authorization keys to proceed. Nothing is moving. We have 3 ships waiting to dock and a backlog of trucks a mile long. Before Brandon could answer, his mobile phone vibrated. It was the operations manager in Singapore. Then the desk phone line began flashing again, showing the incoming code for Los Angeles. Within 15 minutes, the reality of the situation crashed down upon Brandon Finch with the force of a falling cargo container. The Gridmaster system was completely frozen. Brandon sprinted out of his office and down to the main operations floor. The room, usually a model of quiet efficiency, was in utter bedlam. Technicians were shouting over each other. Alarms were blaring from the monitoring stations, and the massive digital maps on the walls were flashing red across every major port in the world. What is happening? Brandon roared, grabbing the nearest junior engineer by the shoulder. The young man, one of the cheap contractors Brandon had hired to replace Raymond's veterans, looked terrified. Sir, the system is demanding master biometric validation. The executive authorization keys have been revoked from the central directory. Whose keys? Brandon demanded, his face turning a mottled shade of red. Raymond Cole's, sir. The system architecture is built around his digital signature for all high-level security clearance. Without his keys, the system defaults to a global lockdown to prevent unauthorized cargo movement. Brandon felt the blood drain from his face. Bypass it. Hack it. Do whatever you have to do to get those ports moving. We cannot bypass it, sir. The engineer stammered. It is hard-coded into the core registry. If we try to force an override, the system will initiate a total data wipe to protect the client manifests. We need Raymond Cole to manually re-authenticate. Brandon stared at the flashing red screens. $550 million in freight was sitting dead in the water. For every hour a port was blocked, the local maritime authorities levied a fine of $70,000. And Atlas operated in 32 major ports worldwide. The financial hemorrhage was catastrophic. He rushed back to his office, his hands shaking as he grabbed his phone. He dialed Raymond's number. It went straight to voicemail. He dialed again, his heart hammering against his ribs. At 45 minutes past 8, Raymond finally answered. Raymond, thank goodness, Brandon gasped, his earlier arrogance entirely evaporated. Listen, we have a massive system failure. You need to get down here immediately. The Gridmaster is locked down. Raymond's voice was calm, cool, and utterly indifferent. I no longer work for Atlas Freight Systems, Brandon. My employment was terminated when I failed to retract my resignation by sunrise as per your instructions. Raymond, please, Brandon begged, the desperation bleeding into his voice. I was out of line, I admit it. Just log in and authenticate the keys. Name your price. We will double your salary. We will give you whatever you want. You called me replaceable inventory, Raymond reminded him smoothly. I suggest you replace me. Raymond, the ports are freezing. We are racking up $70,000 a port every hour in fines. The clients are threatening to pull their contracts. The board is going to have my head. That sounds like a managerial issue, Brandon. I am an engineer, or I was. Raymond, please, you cannot do this, Brandon shrieked, his voice cracking. I did not do anything, Brandon. I simply removed my personal property from the premises when I left. My cryptographic keys are my intellectual property, protected under my original contract. More importantly, we need to discuss the real issue. I have filed a formal complaint with the Department of Labor regarding your mass layoffs. You terminated 45 engineers without the 60 days of written notice required under the Federal Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. By threatening to fire me and withhold my severance because I refused to sign off on those illegal actions, you committed retaliatory discharge. My legal counsel has already notified your board that any agreements you tried to force upon me are void ab initio. The board will be looking for answers, Brandon, and I suggest you find some. Good luck. The line went dead. Brandon stared at the phone, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked through the glass walls of his office at the chaotic operations floor, at the red flashing lights that signaled the end of his career. He was ruined. The realization hit him with sickening clarity. Raymond Cole had not just quit. He had dismantled the entire operation with perfect surgical precision. The fallout was swift and devastating. By noon, the news of the Atlas Freight System failure had hit the financial networks. The stock price plummeted. By evening, Atlas had accumulated over $2 million in port fines alone. But that was just the beginning. The delay in shipping critical components caused massive disruptions in manufacturing sectors across the globe. Within 48 hours, Atlas was facing $20 million in breach of contract damages from enraged clients. The board of directors held an emergency session that lasted through the night. When the dust settled, the consequences were severe. Brandon Finch was summoned before the board. There was no arrogance left in him, no tailored suits that could hide the absolute disaster he had orchestrated. The board was presented with Raymond's documented warnings regarding the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act violations. Realizing that Brandon's actions had exposed the company to massive federal lawsuits and civil penalties, the board acted immediately. Brandon was stripped of his title, his stock options were frozen pending a full forensic investigation, and he was unceremoniously fired for gross negligence and willful misconduct. The junior managers, who had silently watched Raymond's humiliation, were left scrambling to pick up the pieces of a broken system they did not understand. The legal battle under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act became a public relations nightmare for Atlas Freight Systems. Because Raymond had kept meticulous records of his written warnings to Brandon, the Department of Labor investigation was swift. The federal inspectors uncovered the systematic firing of the 45 engineers, proving that Brandon had consciously ignored the mandatory 60-day notice period to artificially boost his quarterly savings report. The company was ordered to pay full back pay and benefits to all 45 affected workers for the 60-day period, along with civil penalties of $500 for each day of violation. In total, the legal liability exceeded several million dollars, compounding the massive losses from the shipping delays. The board of directors realized they had no defense. Raymond's whistleblower testimony was ironclad, and his own retaliatory discharge claim was settled out of court for a confidential but significant sum, ensuring that any attempts by Atlas to enforce restrictive covenants or claw back his earned compensation were legally dead. Over the next month, the decline continued. Unable to guarantee reliable shipping timelines without their architect, Atlas lost 40% of its major corporate clients. The clients fled to the only competitor capable of absorbing the massive volume of business, Meridian Cargo. At Meridian, Raymond Cole sat in a spacious sunlit office overlooking the harbor. The transition had been seamless. With the resources Diana Hayes had provided, Raymond had built a new, more resilient version of the logistics network, tailored specifically to Meridian's infrastructure. His new department was staffed by the veteran engineers Brandon had foolishly discarded, all of whom had gladly accepted Raymond's offer to join him at Meridian with substantial pay increases. The atmosphere in Raymond's new department was one of quiet, focused excellence. There was no shouting, no arrogant executives demanding impossible metrics, only professionals doing what they did best under the guidance of a man they deeply respected. But the greatest victory was not professional. It was personal. On a crisp Tuesday afternoon, Raymond left his office early and drove to a specialized medical clinic on the outskirts of the city. He walked into the bright, cheerful reception area, feeling a lightness in his chest that he had not experienced in years. He found his son, Owen, sitting in a comfortable armchair in the recovery lounge. The young man looked tired, but the pale look that had haunted his features for so long was beginning to fade. The new aggressive treatment protocol, fully covered by the Meridian Executive Health Plan, was working wonders. "Dad," Owen smiled, sitting up slightly as Raymond approached. "How are you feeling today?" Raymond asked, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "Better, much better. The doctors said my markers are improving faster than they expected," Owen said, his eyes bright with hope. "I cannot believe we can finally afford this place. It feels like a dream." "It is real, Owen," Raymond said softly, a deep sense of peace washing over him. "You focus on getting better. I have everything else handled." Later that week, Raymond visited his mother, Martha, at her assisted living facility. With the signing bonus from Meridian, he had moved her to a premier suite with 24-hour specialized nursing care. She sat by a large window, looking out over a beautifully manicured garden, looking more comfortable and relaxed than she had in a decade. Raymond sat with her, holding her frail hand and listening to her talk about the birds in the garden. He felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had spent his life building invisible systems to move cargo around the world. But this, securing his family's future, was the most important system he had ever built. On his drive back to the office, Raymond's phone rang. It was Diana Hayes. "Raymond, I just reviewed the quarterly projections," Diana said, her tone brimming with satisfaction. "We have successfully integrated all of the defecting Atlas clients. Our operational efficiency is up 18%. You delivered exactly what you promised." "As did you, Diana," Raymond replied. "It is a pleasure doing business with you." "I heard about Brandon Finch," Diana added, a hint of amusement in her voice. "He is currently interviewing for a middle management position at a regional trucking firm in Ohio. Apparently, his reputation precedes him." Raymond smiled, watching the massive cargo ships moving smoothly across the water in the distance. He felt no anger, only the quiet satisfaction of a properly balanced equation. "A machine does not need sentimental attachments," Raymond murmured, echoing Brandon's own words back to the universe, "but it does need an operator." He ended the call and drove back toward the gleaming tower of Meridian Cargo. The sun was shining brightly, the shadows were gone, and the future was entirely in his hands.